The wind was fierce, and the cold claimed everything. For hours, the group marched through the void, finding nothing. No tracks, no prey, only snow and a haunting silence. They pushed forward through exhaustion. Hunger was a roar, and their steps grew heavy as lead. But stopping was not an option. If they found nothing by nightfall, the frost would take them all. Then, one of them halted. There was something in the snow, a deep, fresh mark. It wasn't old. Whatever made this had passed only moments ago. He knelt down. The group closed in. In an instant, they understood. This was no small game. It was a mammoth. The silence shifted. Now there was a purpose, but also death. Hunting this titan required a perfect strategy. A single mistake would be their last. They had to choose, strike now, or be swallowed by the winter. The group did not stop to discuss what to do. The decision had already been made the moment they recognized the tracks. They followed the trail carefully, keeping some distance between each other. No one spoke. Their attention stayed on the ground, on the signs, on the direction. The footprints were clear, heavy and deep, showing that the animal had passed through not long before. In some places, the snow was more compressed. In others, broken branches and marks on the trees made the path even easier to follow. The mammoth was close. They moved forward in silence, careful not to make unnecessary noise. Every step was controlled. The terrain was difficult, with ice, uneven ground, and unstable patches beneath the snow. Even so, they kept the same pace. After a while, the trail began to change. The footprints became closer together. The animal had slowed down. Maybe it was feeding, maybe it was resting. The group stopped. Now they needed to position themselves. There was no room for mistakes. Some moved to the sides, slowly widening the distance. Others stayed farther back. The plan was simple. Surround the animal without drawing attention too early. Then, through the thin mist and between the trees, they saw it. The mammoth was huge, covered in thick fur, moving slowly as it searched for food beneath the snow. Every movement was heavy, but calm. It still had no idea it was being watched. For a few seconds, no one moved. They knew that moment would decide everything. A bad attack could scare the animal, make it run, or force it to charge. Spears were raised. Positions were adjusted. Everyone waited. Then one of them moved first. A spear flew through the air and struck the mammoth, but it was not enough to bring it down. The animal reacted immediately. It turned with force, throwing snow into the air. The sound echoed through the cold. The ground shook beneath its
Close
weight.
in.
There was no going
Throw
back
the
now.
spears!
The group rushed forward.
Yes,
More
we have
spears
won.
were thrown. The mammoth tried to break away, but the circle was beginning to close.
Hold the line!
Every
Throw
second
your
mattered.
spears now!
They had to keep
we
the
have
pressure.
it surrounded!
No hesitation, no retreat. Because now stopping was no longer an option. After the first attack, everything changed. The mammoth reacted instantly, turning its massive body and pushing forward with force. Snow was thrown into the air with each step, and the group had to move quickly to avoid being hit. Some stepped back, creating distance to stay out of reach. Others held their ground, trying to maintain control of the situation. The animal was still strong. One spear was not enough. More attacks followed. The hunters threw their spears carefully, aiming for better angles and more vulnerable points. Not every strike worked. Some spears barely pierced the thick fur. Others missed completely. Still, they continued. The mammoth
Get
charged
closer!
toward one of
Flank
them.
it now!
He moved just in time,
Watch the
avoiding
tusks.
a direct
Throw
hit.
the spear!
The distance between them kept changing, closing, breaking, closing again. The plan remained the same. Wear the animal down, force it to lose energy, make every movement heavier than the last. Slowly, the mammoth began to change. Its steps were no longer as firm. Its reactions became slower. The strength was still there, but it was fading. The group noticed. They moved closer. Now the spears were thrown from shorter distances. The risk increased, but so did the impact. Each strike mattered more. The animal tried to resist, but it could not keep the same pace. Its movements lost precision. Its balance started to fail. Then it happened. The mammoth stumbled. Its body leaned forward and collapsed. The impact echoed across the silent land. For a moment no one moved. They watched, waiting, making sure it was over. Only when there was no reaction did they approach. The hunt was finished, but the work was just beginning.
It is
After
finished.
the fall, no
Good.
one celebrated.
We start the
The
butchering
group
now,
approached
before the
slowly,
wolves come.
watching
Yes,
the
we
mammoth
must hurry.
for a few seconds. It was important to be sure there was no movement left. Only then did they begin. Time had become the next challenge. The meat had to be processed quickly. Some of them prepared their tools, sharp stone blades, worn but effective. The first cut was not easy. The outer layer was thick and resistant, demanding strength and precision. But they had done this before. They knew where to start. Gradually the opening widened. The flesh became visible. Heat still remained inside the body, making the work easier. Each piece was removed carefully. Nothing was wasted. There was a silent order to everything. No one needed instructions. Everyone already knew their role. Some focused on larger cuts. Others handled smaller pieces. A few began organizing what would be carried. The amount of meat was more than enough for a single meal. That meant decisions had to be made. What to take first? What could be left for later? The most valuable parts were prioritized. The rest would depend on time and conditions. But meat was not the only resource. The skin would serve as protection against the cold. The bones could become tools. Every part had a purpose. Nothing was ignored. While part of the group continued working on the carcass, others moved away slightly. They searched for a place to prepare the fire. It could not be random. The wind had to be considered. The ground had to be stable. After a short search, they found a more protected area. They began preparing it.
This
At
hide
the
is
same
thick.
time, the rest
Bring
of
the
the
meat
group
here.
maintained a steady rhythm.
We need more
No
wood.
rushing, but no unnecessary pauses. They understood what this moment meant. It was more than just food. It was time. It was survival. When the first portions were ready, they were taken to the fire. The rest would follow. The hardest part was over. Now, they needed to make sure none of it would be lost. While part of the group continued working on the mammoth, others focused on something just as important: fire. They gathered dry branches, small pieces of wood, and thin fibers to help start the flame. The location they had chosen made a difference. It was more protected from the wind, increasing the chances of success. Still, it was not immediate. The process required patience. Hands moved with practice, repeating something they had done many times before. Friction, pressure, small adjustments. At first, nothing happened. Then a faint sign, a thin line of smoke. They continued, careful and controlled, until finally a small flame appeared. Weak at first, but alive. They fed it slowly, adding just enough material to keep it growing. Too much could suffocate it. Too little would let it die. Balance was everything. The fire grew. It stabilized. Soon it was strong enough. The first pieces of meat were placed near the heat. Not directly on the flames, but close enough to cook slowly. Some were supported by simple structures made from branches. Others were turned by hand, carefully, over time. The smell began to spread. A clear signal. Food was finally close. At the same time, another part of the group began a different task. They moved away slightly, searching the ground. Seeds. Even in that cold environment, small amounts could still be found. They collected them patiently, little by little, without rushing. Once gathered, the seeds were brought closer to the fire. There, they began to crush them using stones, grinding, breaking, until the texture changed. Then water was added. There was no exact measure, no precise method, only what worked. A simple mixture formed, rough, uneven, but enough. The mass was shaped by hand without any defined form and placed near the fire. Slowly, the heat began to transform it. The surface hardened. The inside became firmer. It was not bread, as it would be known later, but it was food, and that was enough. While the meat continued to cook, the bread also became ready. Now, the group had more than just one source of nourishment. They had variety, and that made a difference. After hours of effort, cold and risk, fire, meat, and that simple bread represented something greater: continuity. With the fire now stable, the group began to gather around it. Some pieces of meat were ready, and the first portions were carefully removed from the heat. There was no strict order, but there was understanding. Each person waited for the right moment. No one rushed, no one argued. The food was shared as it became available. Some pieces were still very hot, others had cooled slightly. It did not matter. The goal was simple: eat. There were no tools. Hands were enough. Each movement was direct, controlled, focused on making the most of what they had. The bread was also taken from the fire, firm on the outside, softer inside. It was broken into smaller pieces and passed between them, not large portions, just enough to support the meat. The atmosphere began to change. The silence remained, but it was different now. Before, it had been tension. Now it was stability. The group stayed close to the fire, sitting or crouching, focused on eating. This was not a moment of distraction. It was part of survival. The body responded quickly, energy returned. Breathing became more controlled. Movements felt lighter. The effort of the day was still present, but now it was manageable. Even while eating, some continued to look around. The environment had not changed. The danger was still there, but this moment allowed a pause. Small, necessary. While most of the group ate, part of the meat remained near the fire. Some pieces were being prepared for later. Others were already separated for transport. Nothing was random. Everything followed a pattern they already knew. When the meal ended, the focus shifted again. There was still work to do, because this was not just food. It was what allowed them to keep going. With the meal finished, the group began preparing for the night. The fire was reinforced with more wood, ensuring the flames would remain steady for as long as possible. The temperature was dropping again, and the heat was essential. A few members moved slightly away from the group to observe the surroundings, not far, just enough to check for any movement nearby. In that environment, the presence of other animals could not be ignored, especially with the strong scent of meat in the air. At the same time, the rest of the group adjusted the space around the fire. Parts of the mammoth's skin were used as protection against the cold. They were placed on the ground and around the group, forming a simple barrier against the wind. It was not perfect, but it helped. The organization was quick and practical. Each person found a place to rest, but always close to the others. No one moved too far away. Safety depended on staying together. The fire became the center. Light and heat defined the safe area. Beyond that, darkness, unpredictable. Some lay down, others remained sitting, and a few stayed awake, watching. The group rotated naturally, maintaining vigilance. No one needed to be told what to do. They already knew. The environment remained quiet, but never completely silent. Distant sounds appeared from time to time. Small noises, hard to identify. The wind continued to move. The flames shifted but did not go out. The group stayed between rest and awareness. The exhaustion was still there, but controlled. The recent meal had helped, but it did not remove the need for caution. Throughout the night, almost no words were exchanged. Communication was minimal. Everything worked through habit, through experience. As time passed, the environment stabilized. No threat approached. The fire remained strong, and slowly the group managed to rest. Not completely, but enough. Because in that world, survival was not only about what happened during the day, it was also about making it through the night. When the first light of morning appeared, the group was already moving again. The rest had been enough to recover part of their strength, but not all of it. There was no time to stay. The fire was reduced. Some embers remained alive, but they were left behind. Now the priority was to organize everything that had been gained. The meat was handled again, this time with more precision. Some pieces were already prepared for transport. Others needed to be adjusted, cut into smaller portions to make carrying easier. Nothing could be left without reason. At the same time, they had to decide what was worth taking. Weight mattered. Carrying too much would slow them down. Carrying too little meant wasting what they had fought for. The balance had to be quick and accurate. While part of the group organized the meat, others worked on simple ways to carry it. Pieces of skin were used to wrap the food, forming basic bundles. Some were tied, others were placed over the shoulders. Everything was done fast, without hesitation. But something was missing. One member of the group was not there. The absence was clear. No one spoke about it. No one searched. They all understood what had happened. During the hunt, or sometime after, one of them had not been able to continue. In that environment, that was enough. The group did not stop. Not because they did not care, but because they could not. Staying longer would increase the risk. Other animals could be drawn by the smell. The weather could change. The danger was constant. So they moved, even with the loss. The group adjusted naturally. Without words, each person took on what needed to be done. The formation changed slightly, but the rhythm remained. Steady, silent, forward. The meat was secured. Food was guaranteed for a few days. But it had come with a cost, and everyone knew it. Survival was never just about finding food. It was about accepting what came with it. Loss, risk, uncertainty, and still choosing to continue, step by step, without pause. Because in that world, stopping was not an option. With everything organized, the group resumed movement. The pace was steady, not rushed, but without unnecessary pauses. Each person carried what they could. Some had pieces of meat over their shoulders, others carried bundles wrapped in skin, balanced carefully to avoid losing anything. The terrain remained difficult. In some areas, the snow was deeper, slowing their steps. In others, the ground was hard and uneven, demanding constant attention. Every movement had to be controlled. Even so, the group maintained its rhythm. Aligned, silent, focused. They were not moving randomly. There was direction. There was purpose. To an outsider, the land might seem identical in every direction. But to them, it was not. Small details made the difference. The shape of the trees, the way the wind moved across the surface, slight changes in elevation, everything was observed. Everything mattered. During the journey, short pauses were made. Not for full rest, only to adjust the load. The meat had to be repositioned. Some pieces shifted, others needed to be secured more firmly. Nothing could fall. Nothing could be lost. The physical effort was constant. The weight became more noticeable over time. Still, stopping for too long was not an option. Movement meant survival. While they advanced, some members paid closer attention to the surroundings, not only for safety, but also for opportunity. New tracks, changes in the environment, any sign that something had shifted. The silence remained, but now it was different. It was not empty. It carried intention. The hunt had secured something important, but it was not enough to guarantee anything. It was only part of a larger process. The group understood that, so they continued, step after step, without distraction, without error. Because in that environment, maintaining the rhythm was just as important as the hunt itself, and stopping was never safe. As the day moved forward, the group maintained the same pace. There was no sudden change, no long pause for rest. Movement was part of survival. Staying still for too long meant exposure. The meat was still being carried, distributed among them. At times, adjustments were needed. Positions were changed. Pieces that began to loosen were secured again. Everything was done quickly, without interrupting the flow of movement. The environment had not changed. The cold remained constant. The ground was still uneven. There were few signs of life. But something was different now. The group was no longer searching for immediate food. That need had been answered. This allowed a different focus. Now attention shifted toward movement, toward direction, toward observation. Still, caution remained. Some watched the path ahead, scanning for safer routes. Others observed the sides, checking for any change in the environment. Communication stayed minimal. Small gestures were enough. Words were not necessary. The system worked without them, As time passed, the body began to adapt again. After the meal, movement became more stable. Breathing was controlled. The effort was still there, but now it was manageable. The meat they carried was more than food. It was time. A few more days, a few more chances. But it did not change the rule. Nothing was guaranteed. The environment remained the same. The conditions did not improve. And because of that, their behavior could not change. It had to stay consistent, organized, alert, constant. In the distance, the terrain began to shift slightly. Small variations appeared. Different formations, subtle changes that indicated a new area ahead. The group adjusted direction, without stopping. Without hesitation, they continued forward, because in that world there was no final point, no lasting stability, only a sequence of decisions. And the next one had already begun.